Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. This is the actual banner which the Russian troops planted on top of the Reichstag after they seized Berlin on April 30th, 1945. Now you see it in the Museum of the Soviet Armed Forces in Moscow. It's a sacred Russian relic, a memory of the last deciding battle of World War II. To the Soviet Army, the capture of Berlin was the culmination of their drive to avenge the ravaging of their homeland. As the Soviets were fighting their way into the heart of the city, Hitler mobilized his last reserves. Children, as young as 14 and 15, were called up to fight veteran Red Army soldiers. Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, and the other top leaders of the Third Reich had retreated to a bunker. In that underground shelter, Hitler and Goebbels took their own lives. The war against Hitler was over. The Germans had lost. The last major battle of the unknown war had been fought, and peace had come to Europe. Our story, the Battle of Berlin.
Across Europe in the spring of 1945, there was an air of expectancy. For a long time now, the question had been not whether Nazi Germany would be crushed, but how soon. The war was in its 6th year. For nearly 4 of those years, the Soviet army had first suffered, then recovered gloriously, and now was about to exert its full might against the capital of the Thousand-Year Reich. In its wake from the Baltic to the Black Sea, through the wide plains of Belorussia and the Ukraine, the Red Army left the wreckage of the German war machine. The Soviet High Command had completed its plans for this last battle in November 1944. It was to begin on January 20th, 1945. Berlin was 75 miles away, across the River Oder. With much of their land already devastated, the Germans decided to throw everything they had left into this gigantic confrontation. They succeeded in mustering 1 million men, 10,000 pieces of artillery, 15,000 tanks, 3,300 aircraft, all protected by mile upon mile of strong fortification. The Germans meant to contest the Oder and had prepared accordingly by blowing the bridges. Behind the East Bank, the Soviets massed their force. It amounted to 193 divisions, 2.5 million men, 42,000 artillery pieces, 6,300 tanks, and 7,500 aircraft. In all, a superiority of between 2 and 4 to 1 in men and equipment. Recognizing the size of the Soviet concentration, Hitler conceived one last desperate idea: If the Red Army could be held in the East, the Americans and British might accept softer terms than unconditional surrender. But Roosevelt and Churchill had promised Stalin that Berlin would be a Soviet target. There would be no deals with the Nazis. April 2nd, Zhukov, commander of the First Belarusian Front, came back from the final conference in Moscow. Stalin had given Zhukov the honor of taking the German capital. The operation was complex. In essence, Zhukov's Belarusian armies were to strike directly west to Berlin. Marshal Konyev's first Ukrainian front would head for Leipzig, then north. Rokossovsky's second Belarusian front to the north would force the Oder and advance to the Elbe. All that Nazism had promised was at stake. The glorification of the Aryan virtues, the years of racism and terror, of militarism and the brute excitement of the mob were coming to an end. Finally, after all the conquests, it was the Gotterdammerung. All were drawn into this last act. The Nazis banded them into Volkssturm battalions. The Nazi youth performed its last duties, not knowing how close extinction was. They were brave, these children, and dangerous. Hitler emerged from his bunker in the heart of Berlin to hand out decorations, offer encouragement, act the kindly father. It was Adolf Hitler's last public appearance. The message: Germany will remain German. It was a beautiful, gentle morning, with the spring sun beginning to lift the mist. It was April 16th, 5 a.m.